Hey guys, welcome back to World of Warships. Today we're taking a look at the last of these new experimental ships for 14.2. This time the Metz. This is a French Tier 8 cruiser that has 305mm main guns, which is very common for the battle cruisers in the French line. Comparing to Cherbourg, for example, very similar HE with slightly reduced AP alpha in comparison. Surprisingly similar main gun reloads as well, but this one gets access to a burst, it gets access to a super heal. The burst, of course, only available at very close range, where Cherbourg gets access to a reload booster. Maybe not quite as powerful as a burst, condensing so much firepower into such a short time span. It still gives you a rapid increase to your DPM on Cherbourg, and that is not limited by range. So perhaps Metz a little more balanced relative to Cherbourg. Well, we gotta remember that we have these special shells on top of this extra burst fire, which gives us better pen as well as better pen angles. You get 11% better pen and 55 to 65 degree pen angles, which is incredibly powerful, very useful for getting just that little bit of extra damage or even citadels into cruisers that think they are angled to you. The Metz also doesn't have the best armor here. We're not like the Vyazma. There is no icebreaker here. The ship will take quite a bit more damage than the Tier 9 will. But you still have access to a super heal at Tier 8. Tier 8, man, is where I feel like a lot of cruisers, especially the older ones, really have a tough time. Obviously, Tier 6 and 7 as well, but no healing at all on a lot of Tier 8 cruisers. Yes, Cherbourg does get access to some healing, so it's not that different. I mean, it's still pretty different. A standard heal, you're limited on 3, up to 4 of them, where we get 5 super heals base versus 3 standard heals base on Cherbourg. Cherbourg gets 80-second cooldown, where Metz gets 60-second cooldown. Yeah, it's a little extreme. Our engine boost is a little bit weaker though, so 15% engine boost instead of the 20% engine boost we see on the Cherbourg. Same 5-kilometer hydro, so we're not missing that like we see on Brennus, missing out on a hydro at Tier 10. Although that's a different style of ship altogether. Switching over to the HE, I haven't used a lot of the HE here, but you can imagine, I mean, this is a bot. This is PTS, by the way. You can imagine how this burst does to destroyers. It is some bots. This is PTS. It is a disclaimer I have to make. Not only is all of this subject to change, this is work in progress, of course, but also it is on PTS. So I may have been doom and glooming these ships a little bit too much, although I think it's with good reason that I'm worried about these ships incoming to the game. But playing on PTS is never as realistic or a good representation of what's going to happen on the live server. The games are just not the same. People are full sending their ships in more often. You fight against bots more often. You also fight less experienced players. People who play PTS sometimes are just there to try out a new line before they actually grind it on the live server. So there's all sorts of reasons why it's not as representative. Yeah, that close range HE burst is pretty impressive, isn't it? And with that burst at closer ranges here, 12.5 kilometers on this one, you do get increased DPM as well. So there's not really much of a reason to not burst at these closer ranges, especially with HE, as you're not depleting any sort of special ammo stock here. We had quite a few of these special shells, so it's not like you're going to really run out of them very quickly at all. And once you do, it's not like you're going to not be able to burst anymore. You still get access to the same standard 305 shells you get without burst, which are still very capable EP shells. So it's not really that much of a downside, in my opinion, to just full spam your burst. I wish there was a little bit more gameplay element there. There was a little bit more decision making involved. Maybe a bit more of a downside. I think this burst and the lack of a downside for it outside of range, which I have mentioned already, but I should restate, random battles on the main server could get quite passive. So this is a real downside that will impact you in random battles. But I think this idea of not reducing our AP alpha damage, not reducing the reload, reducing the DPM in random battles is a bit of a mistake, to be honest with you. It fits more with PvE scenarios. I think if these ships were designed to be put into PvE. You know, Wargaming in their waterline had some questionable things for random battles and for PvP, but the focus on PvE operations for players that want to play those modes, I think, is really good. I think that's a positive direction for Wargaming to go in. And these ships would have fit perfectly into that. It would have meant that random battles could have, you know, would have been nice to see new maps or other elements to make that game mode feel a little bit more fresh. Not this. I think this does make the game mode feel a little bit more fresh, but maybe not in a good way. There's that improved AP pen helping us out. 5 Citadels, nearly full health dev striking a tier 9 Soyuz. It's bots. Yes, it's bots, I know. But that's very, very powerful still. Not quite actually able to finish him off, though, so we do have to wait for our burst to come back. This ship has a slightly above water Citadel. It's nowhere near as vulnerable as Vyazma, so we'll see that in port towards the end of this video. The armor is quite a bit worse. You will get overmatched more often in more sections of your ship, but that's not really a problem or that unique to a tier 8 cruiser, let's be honest. Overmatch is a massive issue that you have to deal with when you're playing cruisers. So to have a super heal with that improved healing ability, that's the other thing with these heals. You have that amazing 75% repair percentage, where Cherbourg, Marseille, all of the other ships in the game, most other ships in the game, only heal back 50% of pen damage, meaning you're healing sometimes towards the end of your game isn't actually going to be that efficient, especially if you have super heals. The biggest example of this is Salem. Towards the end of your game, if you've managed to work through 2, maybe 3 super heals, you're going to notice that you don't get the full value just because so much of the damage you've taken at that point is unhealable because of that 50% repair percentage. On top of that, your Citadel repair, because you're a cruiser, is 33%. You're not a battle cruiser like Cherbourg, where it's a 10% Citadel repair, so you're not punished quite as hard. Bayard getting some pretty solid fires on us. You notice the overpens there. That's one of the elements of having larger caliber guns with very, very good pen and shell velocity. Sometimes you're going to overpen into these cruisers. But with a burst, you're just spamming out so many shells. And of course, burst fire is not the only gimmick of these experimental temporary ships. Perhaps the more powerful and impactful one is the fight or flight special ability that these ships have. Not only doubling up on adrenaline rush, giving you better reload as you get lower on HP. Those do stack, by the way. You also get better dispersion. That's the big gimmick here, giving you better dispersion the lower your HP is. But you have battleship dispersion table to start with, although you do get to start on lower HP. So it's up to you to weigh whether or not you should start healing at the start of these games. Typically, you may want to heal, especially into an up tier, but into a down tier, maybe there's some thought into just staying at these lower HP values. I think that's an interesting decision to make, to be honest with you, for a ship. But again, the buff is just so extreme, giving you so much better dispersion. These dispersion values, yes, on paper, don't look particularly good, but given the power of the burst fire, given how much better your dispersion gets with this fight or flight talent, it doesn't feel like you're running around with battleship dispersion, to be honest with you. A lot of the time, it can feel even better than battle cruiser dispersion. You guys know how much I'm not a fan of the battle cruiser dispersion table. And these ships felt like they did miss from time to time, but for the most part, they're just very, very accurate. Here, I'm not quite actually getting my salvo off in time for that Harbin. So only our first burst actually is going to get a Citadel there. But it's still just so, so powerful. Maybe I should have used my burst on the Johan there at closer ranges. Again, we do have to mention that these close range scenarios on PTS are not very representative of random battles. Pushing the middle of the map on this map in particular early game is not advisable. I'll try it from time to time, but typically you're going to die very, very quickly when you do that. But just seeing how powerful this burst fire is at close range, and still the ability to have massively improved dispersion and reload at longer range. It's not like these ships are only down to the burst fire while playing them. Just with a normal reload without the burst, they are still incredibly powerful. It's not like they're lacking DPM. These shells are still very good out to range, and on these lower HP, the dispersion is excellent out at longer ranges too. So I feel like we're not giving up too much. And perhaps the lower tier we go with these experimental ships, the more busted they are. Metz being a tier 8, being able to fight against tier 7s, tier 6s, even fellow tier 8 ships, it's going to be very, very tricky to deal with this thing. I guess your hope is that the enemy ship, the enemy experimental ship, greeds a little too hard for this fight or flight talent. Maybe that's the best way to say these ships are going to be fine to deal with. People like myself will get too greedy for the improved reload and, more importantly, the improved dispersion. They're going to stay on low enough HP that there's potential that an overmatching salvo, a particularly strong HE spam session, or some random torpedoes will take the player out. I guess we got to hope for that. These ships are going to be very, very difficult to deal with. This will be the first one that you get, and I think it's pretty strong as well. While you're grinding through them, you will have to complete missions as well as unlocking them. To unlock these ships, they are available in the tech tree specifically, and you have to go below all of the nations on the left side, and there will be an experimental ships tab where you have to do some missions to grind them out, or you can spend doubloons to finish them early. We don't know yet how much or how long it will take. The only information I've really got here is from the PTS devblog thing or news article where they talk about the idea behind these ships and the amount of grind it's going to take is similar to Japanese cruisers tech tree branch from tier 7 or tier 8 to tier 10. So it might take a little while to grind them out. I'm not sure how long these missions exactly will take. We'll have to wait and see for them to come on the live server here. Malta going in for a ram. And they're both stuck on invisible rocks. They actually can't ram one another. This game is pretty funny sometimes. We'll finish off with a burst fire, I suppose. Definitely go check out Malta if you want to enjoy some more content on World of Warships. Great content creator for this game. But for now, that is the Metz games that I have for you. This is the experimental ships, taking a first look at them. Again, it's all subject to change, but to be honest with you, I hope it does change. I hope Wargaming reconsiders adding a lot of this into the game and perhaps decide to only implement this in PvE modes or even into a playlist of sorts, like mode shuffle. So it's PvP, but you decide if you want to fight these ships or not. And as for the build here on the Metz, I was definitely running that very, very greedy build. I did have a 21-point commander on PTS, so I was running Superintendent and then Gunfeeder, I believe, as well. Too greedy, perhaps, for random battles. That does result in pretty poor concealment, although I guess here I didn't add concealment. So 12.4 is actually not bad without Psychic Conceal, but you still probably would want to take it for those up tiers, as we certainly are not the best armored ship. 25 mil bow, no icebreaker here, 27 upper belt, 30 millimeter deck armor, and, well, there's a bit of plating here, and there's a sort of a turtleback. It's only 25 millimeters, meaning a lot of battleships will just overmatch through that, so this turtleback doesn't really exist for them. And because of that, you do have a slightly above water citadel. It's nowhere near as hittable as Vyazma, but it's more hittable than Oregon. So a little bit different there. But remember, this is a tier 8 with a ton of super healing. Like, tier 8s just don't even get heals most of the time, whether it's a cruiser. Sure, it's a battle cruiser. Cherbourg does get a heal, but nowhere near as much. It's a lot. These things are a lot, guys, and I guess it remains to be seen if I'm too much of a doom and gloom right now, pre-random battles, pre-live server. Only testing on PTS doesn't get us a great look at it, but I definitely wanted to take a closer look at all of these ships, as this is a big tipping point. This is a big moment for Wargaming and the future of World of Warships. If they mess this up and continue to go forward with it, we've already seen how they react to previous mistakes and how they just refuse to admit that it's a mistake for years. They'll sit on a mistake they've made, stubbornly pushing forward. And if this comes into the game as it is, I'm worried this will be another mistake that they just continue to push with and refuse to admit that it makes the game worse and less interesting to play. I'm very concerned about the future, but I guess we won't know until it hits live. Thank you very much for watching, and have a great rest of your day.